Episode 15 of A Dose of Sinsanity is underway. We are here once again as a part 2 of our last week with Scurvy Dog. I am GR3. I am joined by Welshie and Jamokin. And if you checked out the video from last week, we talked with Scurvy Dog about his background and the way that he looks to train with his team in order to develop the different forms of communication, and really how important communication is, especially for a captain or even just as a player, in developing a real solid team cohesion. I want to build on that as we get going this week. The first thing that I want to talk about is, should the captain be the drafter? This is something where if you're putting together a team, typically your captain's going to have the larger understanding of the way that you want to play Dota. And is it important since you have the clear understanding, typically, and it's your style, that captain should be the drafter? What do you think?
Not necessarily. The way PSGS has always done it, I have been the drafter, but I know a fair amount of teams where the captain's not always the drafter. You just have to make sure that, and this is gonna come up a lot for this specific topic, but you have to make sure that the captain has communicated their game plan on how they want the game to be played efficiently to the drafter, so the drafter knows how to maneuver the draft and pick those heroes.
How does this work with you, Scurvy, being on Pot of Vainglory? Do you draft for them or for your team, or do you kind of dictate that to somebody else?
So I didn't do any drafting on Pot of Sloth, but when I first started playing with the guys I play with now, it was in C-Dub on a team called Washed Up, and on that team I wasn't the captain, but I was the drafter, and I am the captain and the drafter for Vainglory. But I think it really depends on kind of the leadership structure that the team employs. And while the captain is going to be filling more of like a social administrative role, as far as like the game and like the power difference between like the captain and others, it varies like team to team. And in our case, it's not super important. I think someone else could pick up the captain role, and our drafts would look mostly the same because we communicate so much during that process. And even for me, since I do click the captain button, I do like click the heroes and whatnot, I always just start out the draft as like, what do we feel like playing? What sounds like fun? And we have so much communication and kind of building off each other like during that process. Even though I'm technically quote unquote the drafter, I wouldn't draft anything the same if we weren't all just having a constant conversation throughout the entire process. So for me, I think it, like in my case, it's not super important, but in a team like, Nigma, Kuroki is like the figurehead. Like he's the leader. Like everything kind of like goes through him. Like he plays a true like leader role in that team. But I think a team like, OG, where, I think No Tail might be the captain, but, Chab plays such a huge, social role. I think it really comes down to like team to team and like what works.
Right. That's interesting too. If you bring in, so when I look at different dynamics and like roles, like we talked last week about the PMA guy that Pot of Greed has used previously. There's the captain role, there's the drafter role, and then the fourth one is the shot caller. So obviously there's different types of macro and micro calls that need to be discussed and called out during the game, where there's typically when you say this guy is the shot caller, it's the loudest voice. And whenever they say anything, then that voice has to be the loudest, and then you're doing it all together, whatever they say, whether it be right or wrong, because as we discussed in the past, even if the call is the wrong thing, as long as everyone's doing the wrong thing together, there's still that opportunity that it could work. But as soon as everyone kind of gets flustered and does a whole bunch of different things, then it's almost guaranteed to be wrong.
Yeah.
So the other thing, or part of this is, should the captain be the shot caller? Once again, it's the idea of it's the captain's style of play. It's what they want to be doing. Is this something where somebody else can effectively kind of produce that play? And should that be the same person as the captain, the shot caller? Or is there a certain amount of communication that is needed in order to effectively produce this? Even if you have, say, the shot caller, the drafter, and the captain are three different people, how important is that communication to make it all work?
I've got kind of 2 cents to give on this, actually, if you don't mind.
How about 3 cents?
I got 3 cents. So it was interesting for me because we had a couple of situations.
Can I get a nickel?
You can get a nickel.
Can I get a nickel?
Anywhere
nickel. Nickel.
I got a nickel. You better get a dime.
I got a dime. I got a dime. Can I get a quarter? Can I get a quarter?
Oh, you got a quarter right here.
Oh, we got a quarter. Okay, settle down.
Jesus.
All right, so back to your quarter here, Ben.
I mean, I have on Pot of Greed people who do every different role in that. And the shot caller role, I think, in full honesty, my opinion of it has just really changed over time. I feel like the role of drafter I've dedicated to Naya, and that's just come from the fact that I feel that he understands the theory of Dota better than I do. I'm more simplistic in my strategies, and I think he sees it more in an overall intelligent manner. But I still feel that as captain, and I think he's, maybe this is a captain part, maybe this is a shot caller part, but if there's people who are unsure of what to do next, and if there is people who are unsure of how we get back into the game, or it's a high stress situation and there's kind of multiple voices being heard, mine is the one that ultimately just goes, no, we're doing this, we are full committing. And one of those scenarios is like a great example of that for me is like we were playing against Goldfish Gaming in our first series of the brackets, and the first game, I believe, it went to like 67 minutes, which is like normal for any game we play with like Goldfish and that group. But I just had this moment of realizing, like, we had a Lifestealer, and the Lifestealer had a Stygian, an AC, and a Desolator. And we had a Tiny 4 who had built BKB and everything. And we kept trying to win a team fight to end, even though they had no racks, nothing, everything was exposed. And I just had this moment of, I just decided, all right, look, I've seen it. They don't have any bashers. We have BKBs. We have everything we need. We are literally going to ignore them. We are going to go hit the Ancient, and I don't care what else happens. You are to ignore every person on that team. And even Naya was against it, but I even encouraged, I was like, I said, we're going to put all of our chips on this. Like, I had my Tiny 4 Gills buy out for a refresher so we could have double BKB. And I just said, we are going to finish this. Either we are going to lose or we are going to win. And I know it's going to be a win. So made that call. Naya didn't like it. I think a lot of other people felt nervous about it. But in the end, game finished. Completely destroyed the Ancient in about 3 seconds because we decided to finally just ignore the enemy heroes and just not care about them. Because Dota, surprisingly enough, isn't about team fights. It's about objectives. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the role that I feel like the shot caller plays. It's like if there's hesitation, if there's doubt, it's your job to step in and just say, look, I've heard all the opinions. I've heard both of your sides. I've heard you bickering about it. And this is my opinion. We are moving with this forward. No more conversation about it. We're not going to waste time or energy or fuck up morale anymore by bickering about it. If it's the wrong play, it's the wrong play. But at least we're going to do it together.
For me, I feel like if your draft ever gets really lost, I think there was a breakdown in the pre-game communication on how it should be executed and what what are the contingency plans for if we lose all our lanes or whatever situation happens. Obviously there's exceptions. The game runs really late, like you can't account for everything, but I think on the whole, if you get lost somewhere in the sauce, you have to go back and look at how your plan was communicated to people. But for me, I've always had my shot caller kind of be almost like the in-game player that's going to dictate how we play. And what I mean is, they'll be like, all right, guys, we got to take like the enemy safe lane tower. How are like, who do we need to do that? And it'll be like, they'll be like, Legion Commander, we need you. And then Legion Commander goes like, okay, I need, let's say, Skywrath and Bane. And then like Legion Commander like takes the play from there. So like the shot caller like says where they want to kind of play on the map.
Mm-hmm.
And then whoever's job it is to do that and lead that then takes the responsibility of like executing the shot caller's play and saying what they need to get it done. That's kind of how I've viewed the shot caller, and then kind of like that playmaker relationship.
Yeah, I think the big thing that I'm hearing so far is there's a lot of trust that's needed and understanding in between each team, and that comes with a lot of communication. And the reason I wanted to bring this up, especially talking to you, Scurvy, was we just got done last week talking about a ton of communication and needs and things along those lines, and especially brings into the trust to be able to communicate in this fashion. It does look different in every single team, and it works different in every single team. And this is kind of where you start to see a little bit of that research being applied. Now, for this, and we talked about where you wanted to go and how you had an interview with a pro team. Why don't you talk about first the interview, and then or any other forms outside of just professional Dota that you want to be able to take this research and what you really do?
Yeah, so kind of through the grapevine, I had the opportunity to actually have a formal interview with Quincy Crew. And during this interview, I spoke with both the CEO of the organization as well as the team manager. It was interesting with those two individuals because like one was like super hands-on with the team and one was from a much more like administrative perspective. And it was, I think one of the challenges that I have just, in my like, I think as a professional right now, but especially like in the context of like trying trying to like break into this into like the industry of like esports. He's like ultimately I would love to just work in like the realm of gaming, but it's really interesting because the thing that I struggle with is I guess communicating what I'm doing, why it's important, and like what it looks like, and communicating that in a way that's digestible by people who are just looking for results. And admittedly, with my interview with Quincy Crew at the end, they didn't really see like what are we going to look like before and what are we going to look like after, right? And that's all they really cared about. I wasn't prepared for that at all. But it's interesting because after that, I had an interview with EG. I also had not like a formal interview. I guess it's more like a screening, but I also have had conversations with Liquid as well, and those went a lot better. Just because I'm like, my background being like mostly just academic up at this point. Gain that experience. It's like these people, they just want results and they want to see like what results would look like and if this is something that they need. So it's been a real like learning experience for me.
Yeah, it's really it's different, and there's the bit of it's new, and it's not something that I've really seen or heard of in pro Dota. They have your sports psychologists and different psychologists in esports, but typically what they look at is like the mindset and stuff. But what you're looking at is more of a team communication and how well can we communicate in game, and it's not something that is common. Now, in other sports and things like that, you may see it, but in pro Dota, it's just non-existent. So there's that challenge of trying to say, okay, this is what I do. And this is stuff that I've shown at an amateur level does work. Now, how do I present this in the aspect of their understanding? We don't have this. Why is it something that our organizations who have a history of a lot of success, why should we implement this? We're doing fine already. But what kind of needs do you think, or that you might have talked about in your interviews, that Pro Dota really could utilize this sort of information?
I think a lot of it comes down to being consistency and adaptability. And that being like when it comes to consistency, it's easy to communicate well, enjoy the experience and process of being a professional gamer, of being on administration, on the administrative side when the team is winning and your org is finding a lot of success. But the moment when there are difficulties or challenges, all of a sudden that's when problems, break out, issues arise. And having this training, it helps players and just teams collectively play just consistently in the face of adversity. So like I mentioned earlier, one of the things that I look for and things that I that I actually measure is when a team is losing, are they all still fully engaged, are they all still being positive, respectful to one another, filling their roles in game, and socially, like stuff like that. But then on the other side of that, there was I said consistency, and what was the other thing I said?
Consistency, and I think it was just to do with the mentality like of losing, basically, like when you're on the back end, whenever you're like taking L's. I might be completely wrong.
Yeah, just the like being able to like perform consistency or consistently, both like in game, but also like out of game, and how the training can like help players like have healthier relationships like with their teammates and those that they work with like outside of the game as well.
Okay. So that's interesting to me as well, because I know we've said a couple of times that we basically have like these similarities between, like, we kind of gone back in it a bunch of times, right? We're talking about like the similarities between work mentalities and the team mentalities. Interesting to me though is kind of what you brought up there, like when you're dealing with hard kind of matchups and things like that. So like,
Ben, we're gonna cut real quick.
Okay.
Jimbo,
Yeah,
what
I
happened?
We just had just awkward pauses, and
Oh, okay.
like we kind of lost the point, and I think we'll edit this out and then go back,
Yeah.
and we'll just start back kind of from the top on that point.
Okay, let me flag
That
this.
last point.
You're good.
The Pro Dota needs, or the difference between sports site current team.
Yeah, we kind of lost the plot there a little bit. Do you mind if we do that again, Scurvy? If that's all right with you?
Yeah, not at all. I lost my train of thought there.
You're good, brother. You're good. We've all fucking done that. That's why we were able to do this shit where we just kind of cut it in the middle of it.
That's why we don't do this live.
Step out for like 30 seconds to deal with something. So it's like
I know.
came
I
back,
was reading
like,
the
I don't know
chat,
what happened.
and then Scurvy's like, "So where was I?" And I was like, "Oh fuck."
Yeah,
I
I
don't
got
even know
back
what
when it was where was I, and I was like, I have no answer for this.
You're good.
And then Ben's like, "I think it's this," and I was like, this is gonna be a cut.
It's all good. All right, let's run it back.
All right.
So
we starting with Pro Dota needs.
Yeah, we'll start with
Or where
that.
are we
Just
starting?
start with
Okay.
what do
Where
you
we
think?
starting?
Let's start with just what you think the Pro Dota, like, you'll ask the question, Greco, but I think we just go from like, what do you think the Pro Dota squad, like, what do you think, whatever you think the question is. Fuck me. God damn.
Yeah, I feel you.
Is that kind of tread on my question
Where's that?
of? I guess as we're talking about how the training would differ, so maybe not really.
Yeah, so this is like the training itself down
Yeah.
here. So like
Yeah.
how would it differ in Pro Dota versus like amateur? Because Pro Dota, you're going to be in a lot of those places that he interviewed for, Liquid, EG, Quincy, they have team houses. You can actually sit in there and talk to them and see them face to face, and you're going to be there probably on a daily basis in some form or once a week or whatever the thing is. The Pro Dota needs, what that refers to is when you're trying to explain to somebody who's interviewing you, what exactly are you telling them? Why should they choose you? And why should they use this research when when they've had success without it? You know what I mean?
That's such a rough topic as
Yeah.
well. Like why would we fix what ain't broke? Why would we try to improve what's worked? It's like, well, if you lost, it hasn't worked, has it? Which is like true for like 90% of the teams.
Right.
All right. So you want to run it back, Recco? You let me know whenever you just go into the question, and Scurvy, you take off, and I can just edit out all of this that we're talking about right now.
Give me a countdown.
You're good.
If you don't mind.
You're fine. 3, 2, 1.
So the next thing, you're talking about interviewing with the different proteins, being Quincy liquid and EG. So these are things where they have had success without this research. So what do you go when you're actually interviewing with them? How do you go in and say, well, you've been good without it, but why do you think that they need what? Oh, fuck me. God damn it. Words are hard sometimes. It's always the reset where I always fuck up. Like we have to do a fucking third time.
I always good on the first take.
My other point was adaptability. That's what I totally just blanked on.
All right, run it back, Ben. Give me a countdown.
3, 2, 1.
So we were just talking, like, you had these interviews with EG, Quincy, and Liquid. Mm-hmm. Now, these are real successful organizations and large organizations that have had plenty of success without this kind of research. When you're going in and you're talking to the managers and the owners and trying to say why they need this, what do you tell them? How do you justify that these successful organizations can be better with what you have to bring to the table?
I think one of the big things is, I guess the two big things is going to be consistency and adaptability. Like consistency through the fact of, like, you know, if a Bright were to, like, you know, break out, like, internally, like, you know, between, like, you know, team members, suddenly, like, if you're, you know, performing well, all of a sudden that happens. Next thing you know, your team just starts performing, you know, horribly, right? And if your team has this, you know, rapport developed, you know, the game plan, expectations, like, you know, developed, trained and whatnot, like, all of a sudden you're going to be able to see results much more consistently, like, you know, throughout time. And that also kind of builds into the adaptability component where, like, let's say one of your players gets sick, you know, has a wedding, like, you need a stand-in. How well can you fit that stand-in into the team to be able to perform at the level that the core team was playing at? And with this training that I do, it's going to just help with that consistency and adaptability through adversity that's going to be thrown at the team. And I think that is fantastic for winning and that consistency that teams are looking for.
Your stand example there is really interesting because I like the way you put that, because in that way, like, when you're more aware of what that person brings to the team and what that roles that individual plays, like, you understand, like, exactly like you've been saying, they don't just play the role of position 3 on your team. There's other roles outside of that on a mental and communication level that they play as well. So when you're going to look for a stand-in, you realize, okay, I don't just need someone who can play off lane. I need someone who, if I want a good stand-in, I need someone who can play off lane and can make a shot call and also has the ability to, like, diffuse situations. Like, I need someone who has these qualities. And it's really awesome that I think with that kind of training that you're talking about, that you really start to identify more what are the aspects someone's bringing to this team outside of just general play, right?
Yeah.
And it helps you to identify that.
It's really cool to be able to bring this to, like, with a stand-in. Say somebody's visa's fucked and you're about to head into a major or minor, and you're going to be playing with this guy for the entire duration of the tournament. It's something where I believe your expertise can bring that and make them play more cohesively, rather than just, like you said, like, you just miss the roles that the other person brings to the table. Yes, they're not going to be the one that typically people are comfortable with, but it does kind of bridge the gap a little bit and helps with that transition into a new player.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And I guess ultimately same deal as if you're trying somebody new on a roster too. So
I feel like another case you can make for whenever you're approaching one of these pro teams is just, and this is a point that we said, I think last podcast that I think was really, really interesting, was that Dota, and I would say esports overall, is still in this very early stages of development as like a kind of organized structure and recognizing like the team aspects of it, especially in like a pro aspect. So it would be a very good thing for teams to kind of model themselves off of like what has made professional teams in other sports work. Like, it's not, surprisingly enough, it's not that they've just gone and played baseball for 16 hours a day. Like, it's not been that, right? There's other aspects to the team and other aspects to every team that causes this to happen. And a lot of teams employ psychologists and analysts to, and I mean, therapists even, to like help these people like get these mentalities right and to be in healthy states of mind and know their role and how to communicate clearly. And I think that's something that is a line that can be drawn. I mean, we already drew this already, right? The line of, I mean, huge shocker here, but communication skills are a global impact, right? On every aspect of everything. Because like you said, everything you do is involving people, right? In some form, which is why you're able to look at like pro teams, and they have this, and I'm talking professional sports. And I think the same parallels can be drawn to esports. You think that's pretty fair?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's a very easily kind of seen line of, if we're going to develop like teams that are going to have healthy mentalities and do well, it can't be, oh, hey, we play Dota for 16 hours a day and then one day a week we go-karting. It's like there has to be something more there. And I think that we're going to see in the future as esports develop, the more we're going to see these kind of important roles come out of like team psychologists on like EG or things of that nature, and developing players on their mental, not just their player skill, right? Not figuring out how to deal with this guy who just likes to throw, but also like helping him not throw games anymore when he's pissed off and angry.
I had a bit of epiphany too, where this kind of correlates. So we've heard of different teams just underperforming, not because they're not great players, but because their organization is bad. And when you look at, like you brought up other sports, I always like to refer to Cleveland, like Cleveland Browns, how they seem to always have great teams as far as individual players and things like that goes, but their organization is just garbage. And you just can't win because the organization's garbage and the upper management and things like that. So with the dealing of people and things along those lines, it helps you keep teams. There's multiple examples through esports and Dota where these pro teams are leaving organizations for one reason or another. And it typically is just the players are super unhappy with the organization and the way they're being treated, the things that they're being provided, and the general welfare of the players while being a part of this, living in the house or things like that. And this is something where it's just maybe not the players involved in game, but it also translates to that company aspect, like you were talking about, and the communication between the managers and the players and the owners and the managers, and how even the manager and the chef, whatever aspect there is, but creating that overall better communication, and that solves a lot of the internal strife that teams are going to have or could have. And it makes your organization better. It creates a more relaxed environment for your team to win. Mm-hmm. And overall, your players can worry about playing and not all the BS in between, which is ultimately the manager's job. But sometimes it's frustrating for the manager if owners are not where they need to be, or other aspects are not where they need to be. So having that, I think, is also another really good application for this kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because as the esports kind of progresses more towards the model of our traditional sports teams, I agree that their occupation and their role, and it's going to turn into something much more structured. It's going to turn into something from potentially for some of the new orgs to someone playing Dota for 16 hours a day every day, into more of there are specific times we practice. The practice is very strategic, very intentional about what we practice, and even during the downtime where you're not participating in the activity, how are you spending your time, whether that be mental health, physical health, or like, you know, different, like, you know, mentality training on the side, like, you know, having a team masseuse, you know, stuff like that. Like all that affects a person's ability to compete at a high level for an extended duration.
So can you expand on that a bit more? Like, so what would you say, like, would you say that basically all of these are really important aspects to a team? Like, so teams should be basically, even in the esports scene, like even working out together or like having a physical trainer on the team?
Think so. And I say that with like, with a little bit of like grayness to that, in the fact that I think each team needs something different. I think those are conversations that all stakeholders in an organization should be having, right? Because sometimes an organization might offer something that the teams hate and they despise. And if you're providing them something that they don't care about, they don't want to be a part of, then perhaps you could, you know, develop, you know, you'll develop that rapport by just listening to them, and you'll also be able to like better allocate your like resources. So it's really going to be about like just how well that like communication channel is from the people who are like actually like, you know, writing the checks to the actual players who are getting the job done.
Yeah. And I think I definitely see that, but sometimes I also feel like you have to understand that like certain players, even in the NFL, right? Like it's going to be players who say like, oh, I don't need to practice as much as the other guys do.
Yeah.
And it's
practice? We talking about practice?
Yeah. Not a game.
Not a game.
Practice?
Yeah.
Not a game.
Like even the practice aspect, like if I don't need to practice as much as the other guys do, and to make them understand like, okay, maybe you are like better than them without like practicing, but you have to understand that it's not just about you. Like if people don't see everyone showing up to the gym, it demotivates everyone, right?
Yeah.
So it's about trusting your players and listening to them, but your players also need to listen to you, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think
after
sorry.
you. After you.
We're here for you, buddy.
I'm here for you, buddy.
I was also just thinking how, like, you know, there are some things you could do in Dota that you just have to practice as an individual. Like maybe that's just like last hitting against like the open AI bots to be a better last hitter, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so much of Dota is just like practicing with your team and you know, continuing to develop a lot of the things I've talked about, and you know, reinforcing that or maybe tweaking that, changing that like along the way.
No, I'm with you. Like kind of just an interesting skill. Like, you know, you may be the best last hitter in the Northeast, but that being said, have you ever seen somebody who's able to diffuse two lanes who are fighting and get them to work together again? Like both are equally as impressive in some ways, right? Like the people who can turn mentalities 100% around and get people back in the game is also super important.
Yeah.
And I think that's just something that I think people just kind of depreciate on. Especially in like the higher tiers of Dota, surprisingly enough. Like, you know, behind closed doors, everyone, like we've been talking about, right? Like Artur is arguably one of the best carries in, at least in NA, but yet his attitude is constantly a problem. Like it's, and teams know that. Like teams talk about that and they say like, you know, baby Artur, he's known for this stuff. And that's something
Whoa. Don't break the rules of the podcast. No throwing shade.
We do not throw shade at other people unless you're me throwing shade at the 82 all admins.
You know what? Artur can at me. That's fine. I want him to at me.
Burning bridges already, Ben.
It's what I do, dog. Especially with baby Artur. But go ahead.
So I wanted to kind of bring it back a little bit. So we were discussing how there's the larger organizations, and they do have a lot of these things because they are a little bit more developed, say like rather than like a Division 2 team. It's not uncommon that you have your large organizations have like a massage therapist, or they have like sports psychiatrists, or like just somebody, a psychologist for the team in the esports. So what I'm curious is there a difference between the typical form of sports psychologists that are within esports, say on like EG or something like that, and what you're bringing to the table?
The person that I communicated with in Liquid was their team psychologist, and even though I actually spoke with him directly, and you know, I know other teams have, that psychologist role. I know EG does. I definitely know OG does. But a lot they're coming more from a traditional like sports science perspective and talk to them more, I guess, individually outside a game. Like, are you feeling healthy mentally? Like, what do you need? Let's go through some exercises on how to, maximize, your own performance. How can you bring your A game to the table every single time? And I think that's really what just the focus of just like traditional sports psychology as a field is. Whereas compared to what I'm doing, it's truly about like the nitty gritty, like social synergy elements and social performance elements of a team. And I think it's interesting because, I think that I can, provide a lot of the same. I think I could do a lot of this, things that the traditional, team psychologists do, but I bring this whole other element of like, I'm literally training specifically the social constructs that activate and work when teams start performing in an environment like Dota. And that's something completely unique that someone like me could bring to the table. That's very non-traditional.
So could these two work together, or is it kind of like one or the other? Like you either have one and there's no need for the other, or like because you can potentially do both, would it be like, oh, well, the other sports site, there's just no kind of place for it? Or like I said, could there be like a model where you two work together as one that would kind of prove everything?
I think there could absolutely be a model where both could work together. And I said what I said, perhaps from a place of ignorance with me not having, any formal background in, sports psychology, because like people get like, masters, PhD specifically in that. And that's not what I did, even though I think that there's a lot of parallels. Perhaps, there are, things that they argue that they bring to the table. And from my position of ignorance, I'm not going to like dispute that, right? And that's perhaps something that I don't want to have a conversation about. And I'd go as far to assume that there are things that they can bring to the table that I can't. And I think that if I had the opportunity to just focus entirely on, that team synergy stuff, and I think there could still be a ton of value in, let alone just having two different great minds just doing their thing. I think especially like two great minds working together and me understanding what they're doing, they're understanding what I'm doing, we could better serve just the team itself better, just holistically. Definitely.
You just maximize each other's potential.
Yes.
and just improve overall.
Oh, absolutely.
And going back to one of the first things I said, like, in work, I'm often around people who have a social science background, right? And I imagine some of these team psychologists on these teams, they're around just a bunch of, maybe I'm stereotyping, but like business majors, right? So like just having a second person to bounce this stuff off of and like, get more professional, feedback on, could be so valuable.
And so I'm gonna, since a large portion of our audience is 80-12 players and just that community, what are some of the differences between more professional teams versus like the amateur community, and how do they kind of differ, and how can the amateur community kind of do like mock professional training, sort of like how you run with your team? How does that entirely work?
I think that it's tough because I feel like there's so much like, I guess, gatekeeping in academia where like things are like written and communicated in such a specific language that makes it inaccessible to a lot of people. And in the context of like what I can provide to professional teams, I could be that translator to, translate all this really cool groundbreaking, social synergy research and like apply that. But in the context of like the amateur setting, it's difficult because unless you or someone or someone's doing kind of that translation process for you, it's kind of difficult to like understand that, but even more difficult to like implement it, like I guess the way it's supposed to. And then it's also interesting because like, just like the difference between the amateur scene and like a professional scene where like, these professionals are doing it full time. It's their occupation. Their entire life is structured around it. Whereas like, in the amateur scene, we're all just doing this for fun. And you have to ask yourself, is it even worth it for the amateur scene to, focus on this if it's not something that you're already like familiar with, I suppose,
It's a lot more on the line for those guys on the other side.
Yeah.
Right?
Wait, I do want to also point out is like when we talk about the amateur community, you don't just wake up and you're a professional. Like these players do
Yeah.
have to start somewhere, and
True.
a decent portion of the players are going to start working through the amateur community to build experience. So I
Yeah.
do think that there are those players that will do whatever it takes to like min max at getting better at the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's the aspect too of like something to like speak of as far as pro goes. A lot of the times in these large organizations, they're going to have a team house. Everyone's going to be there. You're going to be in person and be able to speak to all these guys on a daily basis. You're going to be able to develop a rapport with the players themselves outside of what you do for like a living. Just take an interest in who they are. But then when you get to amateur community, you're not seeing these guys like 82L. Typically, you're not seeing these guys on a daily basis. You're not in person. You may talk to them almost every single day. So losing that face-to-face, which is oddly enough kind of translates from what we talked about last week with the pandemic going on and having to do virtual type deals. There is those sort of challenges. But I do believe that there are some things in the amateur community that they can grab from this. Such things as like what we talked about last week with the nonverbal, the quick win, the long win of the 3 different levels of communication while in game. Where these kind of things, you may not have a complete and total like model to play off of, nor would you be able to have somebody really dictate, hey, is this working? Is there another route that we need to go that, say, a professional would be able to do, like yourself? But there's the start of it, and there's the idea of opening that conversation with your teams that I really believe that those in like 82L and any other amateur communities can really grab, which is one of those reasons why I wanted to bring you on, because though some of this stuff is a bit advanced, there is the aspect of things that you can grab as an amateur player and bring to your team. And the ideas of understanding communication and the different ways that it could look, all that I really believe, like there are some things obviously that are going to be challenges in transferring from professional to amateur, but there's always those small things that you can grab and really improve your team based off of.
I agree. It's tough. And one thing, I guess the thing that I'm thinking right now is I wish that, a lot of this stuff, like, was more accessible, but I guess, for those in the amateur community, it's like just knowing like where there are these resources that you could refer to and where you could kind of like, find your own like self measurements, for these things. And I think it could, just give you a lot of like skills moving forward, like, not even just like working with your, 82L team potentially, but even just like learn those skills to apply them, like, in work moving forward, just being like a better like manager or a better leader, or, whatever role that you're filling, like, in the context of work itself. But like having this conversation like right now, like makes me want to like make some more like make like a YouTube series where I like talk, like really go through and just like talk about this stuff and like, how can you do this? I think that'd be really cool to do.
It would be cool. It'd be fun. And then like you talked about beforehand when we were going to do this last week, about different charts and different models that you were going to show potentially. And sometimes it's hard to explain those without visual things. I think that the YouTube series would actually be really, really neat and count us interested in actually watching that and really taking a look at it. I want to get us kind of back towards the sports versus esports kind of deal. So we talked about how there's there's differences and there's similarities kind of between the two. Um, but how would you say, like, if you were going into the psychological aspect of communication things, as far as like a sports team, um, how would you kind of extract the differences, say like from a football team versus esports, and put that kind of into a program?
So I want to. A lot of it goes into like analyzing the specific performance domain itself. All of my research has been in the context of what we call complex performance domains, and complex performance domains are basically instances where that teams are working in that have an element of time, like there's a very overwhelming like this time pressure that the team is experiencing. It's complex in nature. It requires adaptability, and the goal is constantly shifting like throughout the entire duration of like the activity that you're doing. And my research in grad school is funded by things like the United States military, like NASA, because like we were talking about things like literal like space exploration missions, like sending 6 people up on a rocket, and there's a engine like malfunction, right? If they don't figure that out, they're dead. I guess it's like very black and white, but that's just the reality of things, and that's kind of like the environment of like what we were basing our research on. And but like looking at Dota, so much of Dota is like very much the same thing. Just like looking at that description of a complex environment like Dota, there is a strict element of time pressure. The goal is always changing. You need so much. There's so much critical information that just everyone needs to know, so everyone can kind of be on the same page. Moving forward. For a game like football, I'm not sure if that performance domain would necessarily benefit from all the same training that I'd be doing. So it'd be about looking at the actual activity that they're participating in and figuring out what elements of communication is there and how can I maximize those. Because even just thinking of it here off the top of my head, I think I would approach it very different, because I don't think it would be as
black and white kind of deal.
It would be more black and white, when there's a lot more gray area in Dota, because like a play happens and then you huddle up, right? And even like during the play itself, how much actual like communication, like verbal, is going on.
Coming from a guy,
difficult.
Yeah, coming from a guy who's played football pretty much his entire life, the way that the communication really works is there's transit, or basically you transmit the play in some form, whether it be verbal, whether it be hand signs, things like that. Somebody makes sure that everyone understands that. And then, say from a defensive aspect, which is what I played, you have different checks and call out like different strengths where you're going to line up, different adjustments prior to the play, things like that. There are some calls, say if you have like an interception, somebody's going to yell a certain term. If you're like a quarterback, you're making different checks, changing play based on what you're seeing. While the play is actually running, very, very limited communication. A lot of it is like that nonverbal type stuff.
Yeah.
But like you have your long wind of transitioning of, okay, this is the play, this is what we need. Or say you're on the sideline between series, you have your long wind, your quick wind type stuff is your checks, your call outs, your strength, things like that. And then you have your nonverbal of what's actually occurring in the middle of the game and during the middle of the play.
I do want to touch back to one thing you did mention in passing. So would you say playing Dota is just as hard as like working for NASA, going up into space, and like being in the military? Would you say like us Dota players are like on that level?
There's I think the activity itself is very, very comparable. It's just the actual like gravity or weight of the situation's like drastically different. So there's different protocols.
Well, yeah, because we have gravity here on Earth, and when they go into space, there's like much less gravity. No, yeah, that makes sense. So it's tough. It's basically what you're saying is it's harder. We're better.
Yeah, Dota's harder than being an astronaut, hands down.
We figured it out. All right, good job, community. We did it.
He's over like, whoa there, boys. Whoa there. I'm not saying that.
I mean, arguably, in some elements, I'd agree. But like, if we lose a game of Dota, we might lose the 80-12 championship, or we might lose 25 MMR, right?
I mean, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Both of those, actually. 80-12 is kind of the pinnacle of Dota, and
It is.
my MMR is falling quick. But I did want to touch on is we've talked about body language, our body language in context of what your character's doing and reading your teammates and whatever. But there's also the added aspect when you're playing professional Dota of being in the booth with the boys and like feeding off that energy. And like, how do you help as a captain make sure that your players don't get overwhelmed by the excitement of something or something of that nature, where they're put themselves in a situation where their performance might be impacted because of just feeling the energy of the crowd and the players around them, actually sitting next to them?
I think this is interesting. This might even be something that Pot of Vainglory will experience when we go to the LAN.
Hell yeah, you
October.
will.
Yeah.
You're winning it all, baby.
Sweep.
I think a lot of it is just going to be kind of like some back end conversations, like up to that point, and having the conversation about, we're going to be, in a live event for the first time, and I'm thinking in the context of my team, but also like if I was like working for maybe a D2 team that was going to be at a big LAN, like a major for the first time,
yeah.
right?
Out of sense.
Having that conversation with like, it's going to be different, there's going to be like different factors going on. And I think just having, I cannot put enough like emphasis on just how productive and how fruitful just like good constructive conversations can be about just, I think getting different like ideas, concerns out of people, but just like getting everyone on the same page, like moving into that environment and just continuing to develop just that more robust rapport between like potentially you as a manager and just like the team like itself, like just being very like thoughtful about these conversations that you have like before going into that, and being in that situation is probably the best way to kind of like navigate that. And then from there, just experiencing it and just like adapting with what comes after that.
That's really interesting too, if you don't mind me adding real quick. So we talked to Fu a couple weeks ago, and he was discussing their first LAN with Thunder Awaken and what it was like when they first got there. And he said it was overwhelming to a sense because it is different. You're not sitting like in your team house with all the guys, things you're comfortable in. You're in a different country with a different crowd. People speak a different language, and you're playing in front of fans, and it can be overwhelming in certain types or certain situations. So like communication and things like that, and understanding that we just need to simplify. And there's a big deal of simplification in the sense of, okay, we're not going to try to do all these crazy things that is developing in this meta. We're going to play our Dota. We're going to like speak the way that we normally do. And we're going to try to create the similar environment that we're used to, because there's a big thing of when things become bigger than what you're used to, and a bigger stage, and play in front of a lot of people where there can be a lot of overwhelming like things. So you want to simplify, keep things comfortable, and that aspect of keeping your communication and how you speak, not just in the game, but the entire time you're there, plays a major role in the sense of how you're going to go about the entire tournament and how you're going to perform at your best. Sorry to cut you off, Jambo, but I just thought it was really interesting.
One thing I wanted to add, and it isn't necessarily a question, it's just something that when I've talked to various performance coaches, be it esport related or just regular sport, is like how important it is to like actually make sure you're breathing. And I feel like it's really relevant when it comes to esports, because since it's not like physically strenuous, when you're pushing your buttons and like you're so absorbed in the moment, you like almost stop breathing sometimes, and you're like holding your breath on what's happening, and like the negative physical consequences that actually has on your body and your performance. And so for me, like if we were going, like one of the biggest pieces of advice I could give a team participating in a LAN is like, when shit's getting real, make sure everybody's like checking their breathing and making sure like we're like taking in oxygen so we can actually like play the game efficiently. Like it's something so small, but like it can have like massive knock-on effects on your performance throughout the game. That
So
was just my fun fact.
before you chimed in, I was actually about to chime in because I was going to make a comment about this based on what was previously said, but what you said even just reinforces this even more. Mindfulness is literally exactly what you guys are talking about. And mindfulness through kind of like the scientific scope kind of originated in kind of the Eastern medicine in a form of like meditation and whatnot. But like mindfulness is like this true, like really powerful, robust kind of psychological construct in the context of like our Western like understanding. But it's basically an individual's ability to just separate their actual like interpretation of what's going on and like to stay in their own mind, and basically just training people to be able to like take a deep breath and just breathe, identify like, okay, this is where I am. I hear the crowd. I'm sitting next to my teammates. I'm in a booth. Maybe it's hot in the booth. You like go through, think about all these things. Just acknowledge your presence. Acknowledge the situation you're in, and just basically you ground yourself, which gets you ready to play. And it's a really, really cool thing that I think is so cool.
And you think that's going to help you when you get to the LAN event in MD2L? Do you think like just getting your team to be kind of mindful when they're on stage and like not get too psyched out by the crowd or anything like that?
That's something that I haven't even had a conversation with the team about. And as much as I would like to, I don't know. I think that's definitely like a conversation to have. I think whether or not we actually like go through any like mindfulness training like in and of itself, it's definitely a conversation like that we'll have, because kind of like what I said earlier about just like having the conversation about like how the experience is going to be different. It's going to be really good, just like help prepare us for a lot of what might be there like when the time comes. But and now that I mentioned it too, mindfulness is like a huge part of like sports psychology as well. So I got to give credit where credit's due.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you have to imagine that anybody who steps out onto the field, and especially when you're getting booed by the enemy team and everyone's cheering when you're messing up and when you're making mistakes, it has a big impact on you mentally. I mean, Lord knows I can barely understand, like I can barely grasp like how you would feel dealing with just this crowd of people screaming around you while trying to play Dota. I have enough trouble getting rid of my yips before, like, I mean, we're top 3 now going into semis. I have enough trouble getting rid of my yips in my own room, like sitting. I can't imagine what it would be like whenever like you're sitting on stage. It may be something you really want to consider like talking to your team about to get ready for, because it sounds like something that could break a player. To me, it would break me, for shit's sake.
Mindfulness is also huge in your own mood regulation and like tilt attitude like regulation. Basically people who experience like a lot of tilt when after they've been trained in basically like mindfulness training or mindfulness based meditation is more the scientific term for like the clinical world, but it basically lets people like detect and recognize when they're starting to boil up, when they are feeling toxic, when they start